My husband stood in front of everyone I loved and told me his daughter was right to disrespect me in my own home. That single sentence broke something inside me that had been cracking quietly for 8 months. I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply smiled, and that smile terrified everyone in the room who knew me, because they understood the woman standing there was done being patient. By sunrise the next morning, the girl who mocked me would lose every comfort I had ever given her, and the truth about why my husband married me would come crawling out into the light. My name is Diane Callahan. I was 66 years old the night my world rearranged itself in my own dining room. For most of my life, I believed keeping the peace was worth almost any cost. I have since learned that some silences are far too expensive, and some peace is just slow surrender dressed up in a pretty apron. That evening began as a celebration, the first big family dinner I had hosted since marrying Gerald Whitmore 8 months earlier. Gerald was 69, soft-spoken, and remarkably good at appearing thoughtful in public. Anyone who met him at church would have called him a gentleman, a lucky find for a widow like me. For a long while, I believed that too. I had lost my first husband, Walter, to a sudden stroke 6 years earlier, and after he was gone, my house grew unbearably quiet. My daughter Rachel told me I needed companionship again. My son Mark said the house needed to hear laughter. So when Gerald came into my world with his careful kindness and his understanding of loss, I let myself hope. Gerald had a daughter named Brianna, 22 years old, with expensive shoes and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The first time we met, she hugged me lightly, stepped back and said, "Dad deserves to be happy, so I will try." That single word, try, stuck with me for months afterward. Still, I told myself she was young and grieving her mother, Susan, who had passed 5 years earlier, and I was patient, far too patient. The small insults came first. Comments about my quaint old furniture, eye rolls when I asked her to take her shoes off at the door, jokes about my old lady habits with Tupperware. I let most of it go because I believed family took time to heal, and I reminded myself that grief does not always sound gentle. Then came the money. I was comfortable, not wealthy, but secure, with a modest pension and a college fund I had built for my grandchildren over the years. Gerald knew this, and slowly the small requests began. "Her car insurance is high this month," he would say. "She is between jobs right now. Her textbooks cost more than we expected." I said yes more times than I should have. Covering a repair, then a tuition payment, then the down payment on a car after Brianna sat at my kitchen table in tears, telling me she just wanted to get her life together. Temporary help has a bad habit of becoming permanent the moment people get used to spending what is not theirs. And soon Brianna was not asking with gratitude anymore. She was demanding with attitude, once telling me to relax because it was not like I was running out of money. My daughter Rachel saw it before I was ready to admit it. She sat at my table one afternoon, watched Gerald and Brianna leave with shopping bags from a trip I had apparently paid for, and asked me directly, "Mom, are they taking advantage of you?" I laughed it off, the way women do when they are trying to stop a painful truth from becoming real, and told her not to be dramatic. Rachel did not smile. "I am not being dramatic, Mom," she said. "I am being your daughter, and there is a difference." She told me that David saw it too, that even the grandkids noticed how Brianna spoke to me like I was a guest in my own house. Before she left that day, she took my hand and said, "Please do not wait until they really hurt you to believe what is happening." I told her I would think about it, but the truth is, I was tired of being alone, and that fear made me slower than I should have been to see what was right in front of me. Weeks later came the dinner. My sister Diane was visiting from out of state, my son Mark brought his wife and kids, and Rachel came with her teenage son Leo, old enough to notice everything and quiet enough not to miss it. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler, set out the good china, and hoped for a warm night that would prove the cracks I felt could still be fixed. Brianna arrived late, sweeping in with her phone in hand, kissed her father on the cheek, gave me a small nod, and looked around like she was evaluating a hotel she had not chosen. Dinner started well enough. There was laughter. My sister told old stories, until she asked Brianna how college was going, and Brianna made a face and said it would be going better if people around her understood boundaries, adding that some people get married and suddenly think they can tell grown adults how to live. The table went quiet. Keeping my voice calm, I said, "Brianna, if you have something to say, please say it respectfully." She laughed, that light, sharp laugh I had learned to dread. looked around at my children and my sister and my grandson, and said, "See, that is exactly what I am talking about. She loves pretending she is in charge." I felt my stomach tighten, but I held my ground. "This is my house," I said, "and I will not have you speak to me like that in front of my family." She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said the words I still hear like a door slamming shut. "Your family, not mine, and you are not my mother. So stop acting like I owe you any respect." That is when Gerald spoke, and what he said mattered even more than her insult. He looked right at me, calm as if discussing the weather, and said, "Diane, she is not your daughter. Do not correct her." I cannot fully explain the pain of that moment. It was not just humiliation, it was betrayal dressed up as normalcy, a husband choosing a lie over the truth in front of everyone I loved. For a second, I thought I might cry, and for another, I thought I might scream. Instead, I smiled, a small, controlled smile that made Rachel narrow her eyes, because she knew me well enough to understand that danger had just walked into the room. I asked her quietly to help me with the dishes, and the rest of the dinner limped along in a silence no one dared to break. That night, after everyone left, Gerald came into the bedroom annoyed, not ashamed. "You made it worse by pushing her," he said. I looked at him and asked plainly, "Did you marry me because you loved me, or because you thought I would make your life and hers easier?" His face flickered for just a second, a guilty pause I was not meant to see, before he said that was an insulting question. I told him quietly that the truth only feels insulting to the person who has been hiding it. And he fell asleep angry while I sat awake in the dark living room with a binder of statements, titles and passwords, making a list of every bill I had paid and every insult I had swallowed. By 4 a.m, my hands had stopped shaking, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. Before dawn, I made 3 calls blocking Brianna's tuition payment, removing her from the car insurance policy, and freezing the credit card she had been treating as her own for over a year. I also called my lawyer, Julian, and asked for an urgent meeting, because something about the flicker in Gerald's eyes the night before told me this ran far deeper than one rude dinner. Before I tell you what Julian found, if you have made it this far with me, take a second and hit subscribe on The Revenge Tale. Because next week I am sharing a story about a family secret buried for 20 years that finally came undone. When Gerald and Brianna came home to find her cards declined and the car locked out of its app, Gerald exploded, demanding I fix it immediately. I told him plainly that the accounts were mine, the car was titled in my name, and since I apparently had no right to correct his daughter, I no longer had any obligation to support her either. That same afternoon, Julian arrived with a county records clerk beside him, holding a thin file that made my stomach drop before a single word was spoken. He explained that 3 weeks earlier, draft paperwork had been quietly filed attempting to adjust the title on my home, paperwork that would have given Gerald a much stronger legal claim to remain in the house, and could have complicated my children's inheritance significantly if anything ever happened to me. The filing also listed Brianna as a long-term dependent tied to that same property, language clearly designed to make it look like the two of them already had a rightful claim to everything I owned. I turned to Gerald and asked him again, more slowly this time, "Did you marry me because you loved me?" This time he could not talk his way around it. He admitted that after Susan died, he had drained most of what she left behind through bad investments and hidden debt, that he had been drowning in shame for years, and that meeting a stable, organized widow felt like the answer to a problem he was too proud to face honestly. Brianna, hearing this for the first time, went pale and turned on her father, asking him directly if he had used her the same way he had used me. Gerald could not meet her eyes, and his silence answered louder than any words could have. That silence was the moment everything finally became clear to all of us. Gerald had not married me out of love, he had married me out of desperation, and he had spent years quietly teaching his daughter to protect his lies instead of ever facing them honestly. I told him he would be leaving my house that same day, and that Julian would be finalizing every legal protection needed to secure my home and my children's inheritance against any further schemes. Brianna, shaking and in tears, chose to stay behind, and for the first time in 8 months, she told the truth without flinching, admitting she had signed papers she never fully understood and had let her father's fear become her own excuse for cruelty toward me. I did not rebuild a relationship with Brianna overnight, and I will not pretend forgiveness came quickly or easily, but I gave her one condition, that she tell the whole truth going forward and start standing on her own 2 feet. And slowly, over the following months, she did exactly that, finding steady work, finishing school on her own terms, and learning the difference between the silence that protects you and the silence that slowly destroys everyone around you instead. As for me, I kept my house, I kept my dignity, and I kept the people who genuinely loved me close beside me. I learned that real love never needs someone else's humiliation to survive, and that the quietest woman in the room is sometimes simply the one still deciding how much more she is willing to forgive. If you have ever mistaken someone's patience for weakness, I hope this story reminds you that patience always has a limit, and when it finally runs out, it never comes back looking the same way it left.